A judge slaps a black girl in court thinking he's just silencing another loudmouth teen, but then she pulls out her phone and calls the one man he never thought she could reach, a Supreme Court justice. Suddenly, the courtroom freezes. The girl says just 5 chilling words, and the judge's entire career starts to unravel. Who is this girl, really? And what secret does she hold that could bring down one of the most powerful men in the state? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The streetlights cast long shadows on the cracked sidewalk as Kendra and Malik Morgan made their way home from the community center. The warm Atlanta night wrapped around them like a blanket, cicadas chirping their evening song from the trees that lined the residential street. A gentle breeze carried the scent of jasmine from nearby gardens, mingling with the distant sounds of cars on the main road. Kendra walked with purpose, her backpack full of notes from the forum hanging heavily on her shoulders. Her mind was still processing everything they'd learned about civil rights and racial profiling, cataloging each fact with her characteristic precision. Next to her, Malik's longer strides meant she had to walk a bit faster to keep up, her sneakers making soft scuffing sounds against the concrete. That speaker really knew his stuff, Malik said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. When he talked about his own experience getting stopped and frisked 3 times in 1 week, man, that hit home. His voice carried a mixture of admiration and weariness that made Kendra glance up at him. Kendra nodded, her dark eyes serious beneath her neatly braided hair. The statistics he shared were particularly compelling. African American males being 2.5 times more likely to be stopped by police than white males despite making up a smaller percentage of the population, Malik finished. He ran a hand over his close-cropped hair, sighing. Yeah, I know those numbers by heart now. Living them will do that to you. His shoulders tensed slightly, a gesture Kendra had come to recognize whenever these topics surfaced. A car passed by, its headlights briefly illuminating their faces, casting stark shadows before plunging them back into the softer glow of streetlights. Kendra glanced at her brother, noting the tension in his jaw. At 17, Malik had already experienced his share of random stops and questioning, each incident etched into his memory like unwanted tattoos. The part about knowing your rights, though, Kendra continued, her voice steady and clear in the night air. That's what really matters. Knowledge is power. Like the Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable searches and seizures or the right to... The sudden flash of red and blue lights behind them cut her off mid-sentence. A police cruiser pulled up alongside them, its tires crunching on the asphalt and sending Kendra's heart into her throat. She swallowed hard, forcing her exterior to remain calm, analytical even as her pulse quickened beneath her skin. The officer's spotlight swung toward them, harsh white light flooding their vision, turning the peaceful neighborhood scene into a stark interrogation. Malik instinctively stepped slightly in front of his sister, shielding her with his taller frame, his protective instinct immediate and unquestioned. "Get down on the ground!" The officer's voice boomed through the night air as he emerged from his vehicle, one hand already on his weapon. The words seemed to hang in the humid air, shattering the peaceful evening. Malik raised his hands slowly, clearly visible in the harsh light. "Officer, what did we do wrong?" His voice was steady, controlled, just like they'd discussed at the forum. Kendra could hear the effort it took him to keep his tone even. The officer's face tightened, his hand gripping his weapon more firmly. "I said get down on the ground, now." The command echoed off nearby houses, where porch lights began flickering on as curious and concerned neighbors responded to the commotion. Kendra watched the situation unfolding with razor-sharp focus, her analytical mind clicking into high gear despite her racing heart. Her mind raced through relevant case law, constitutional precedents, proper police procedure. She could see the officer's agitation growing, could read the dangerous escalation in his body language, the widened stance, the tightened grip, the narrowed eyes. "Step back," the officer barked at Kendra, who had moved slightly forward, her small frame partially emerging from behind her brother's protective shadow. Instead of retreating, Kendra squared her shoulders, her voice clear and precise, cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "Officer, I need to inform you that according to Tennessee versus Garner, you have no lawful right to use deadly force or excessive aggression unless we pose immediate danger, which we clearly do not. The officer's attention snapped to her, his face darkening like a storm cloud. Last warning, step back. His voice carried the edge of someone unused to being challenged, especially by a teenage girl quoting legal precedent. Kendra stood her ground, her hands visible at her sides, her posture neither threatening nor submissive. Her voice took on the measured cadence of someone reciting from memory, the words flowing with practiced ease. The Supreme Court ruling clearly states that law enforcement cannot use deadly force to prevent escape, unless the officer has probable cause to believe that the suspect poses a significant threat of death or serious physical injury to the officer or others. Get back! The officer's voice rose, his hand moving to his taser with practiced efficiency, the movement triggering alarm bells in both siblings' minds. Malik's eyes widened in alarm, his protective instinct warring with his knowledge of what could happen if he moved too suddenly. Kendra, please. His whispered plea carried desperation and fear for his sister. But Kendra continued, her voice unwavering even as the officer unholstered his taser, the weapon now catching the flashing lights in its metallic surface. The use of deadly force in this situation would constitute an unreasonable seizure under the Fourth Amendment, as established by... The crack of the taser deploying split the night air like lightning, the sound sharp and final. Kendra's body jerked violently as the probes hit her, electricity coursing through her small frame, muscles contracting beyond her control. Her last words came out in a strained whisper as she fell, her eyes wide with shock and indignation. "You're violating federal precedent." "Kendra!" Malik's anguished scream tore from his throat, echoing through the street as his sister crumpled to the ground. The sound contained all his fear, rage, and helplessness in 3 syllables that seemed to hang in the air. The harsh glare of the police lights continued to strobe across the scene, painting everything in alternating washes of red and blue as darkness claimed Kendra's consciousness. Her body lay still on the sidewalk, the knowledge she had tried to use as a shield now powerless against the reality of what had just happened. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Kendra's eyes fluttered open. Her head throbbed, and every muscle in her body ached like she'd been hit by a truck. The cold concrete bench beneath her offered no comfort, and the institutional green walls of the juvenile holding cell seemed to spin slightly as she tried to focus. She attempted to sit up, wincing at the sharp pain in her wrists. Looking down, she could see angry red marks where the handcuffs had been too tight. The events of the night came rushing back. The forum, walking home with Malik, the police officer, reciting Tennessee versus Garner, and then... nothing. A digital clock on the wall read 1:27 a.m. Kendra's throat felt dry, and her usually sharp mind felt foggy. Through the metal bars of her cell, she could make out a few officers gathered around a desk, their laughter carrying down the hallway. "Did you hear her?" one officer said, his voice thick with amusement. "According to Tennessee versus whatever, like some kind of mini-lawyer." Another officer chuckled. "Yeah, these kids watch a few episodes of Law and Order and think they know everything. Big mouth on that one." All that fake law talk didn't help much when the taser hit, did it? A third voice joined in, followed by more laughter. Kendra closed her eyes, focusing on her breathing like her mother had taught her. The officer's words stung, but she knew better. Those weren't fake laws. They were real Supreme Court precedents, carefully researched and memorized. She'd spent countless hours studying them, understanding their implications. The sharp click of heels on linoleum interrupted her thoughts. A woman in her 50s, wearing a navy blue pantsuit and carrying a tablet, approached her cell. Her silver-rimmed glasses hung from a chain around her neck, and her expression was as cold as the cell's metal bars. "Kendra Morgan?" The woman's voice matched her appearance, efficient and detached. "I'm Mrs. Latham, your assigned social worker for intake processing." Kendra sat up straighter, ignoring the wave of dizziness that followed. "Mrs. Latham, there's been a serious misunderstanding. My brother and I were simply walking home from a youth civil rights forum when—" "I'm going to stop you right there," Mrs. Latham cut in, her pen hovering over her tablet. "The report indicates you interfered with an officer performing his duties and resisted arrest. They had cause." "That's not what happened," Kendra replied, keeping her voice steady despite her frustration. The officer had no probable cause to stop us, and according to Terry Ver Ohio Dash. Mrs. Latham's sigh was sharp and dismissive. This isn't a courtroom, Miss Morgan. I need to complete your intake assessment. Now, I have some standard questions. I'd like to make my phone call first, Kendra said, and I need a copy of the arrest report. Those will be available after processing clears, Mrs. Latham replied without looking up from her tablet. Now, any medical conditions we should be aware of? As Mrs. Latham continued her questioning, Kendra became increasingly aware of her surroundings. Through the bars, she could see other cells, most occupied by young faces, black and brown kids who looked even younger than her. In one cell, a boy who couldn't have been more than 13 sat huddled in a corner, his eyes wide with fear. A girl in the cell across from Kendra's raised her hand, trying to get Mrs. Latham's attention. Miss, I've been here for hours. When can I call my mom? Processing takes as long as it takes, Mrs. Latham responded without turning around. You'll be notified when you can make calls. Kendra watched as the girl slumped back against her cell wall, defeat written across her young face. The same scene played out again and again. Kids asking for phone calls, for water, for information about their cases. Each request was met with the same cold indifference. After what felt like hours of questioning, Mrs. Latham finally looked up from her tablet. You'll have a preliminary hearing in family court tomorrow morning. We're still trying to reach your mother. My mom hasn't been notified yet? Kendra's voice cracked slightly, the first sign of emotion she'd shown since waking up. She must be worried sick. Please, I need to call her. As I said, after processing clears, Mrs. Latham's heels clicked against the floor as she turned to leave. Try to get some rest. Alone again in her cell, Kendra lay back on the hard bench. The fluorescent lights continued their endless buzz, making it impossible to tell whether it was day or night. Her mind, usually so focused and sharp, felt scattered. But there was one thing she could hold on to, one piece of legal precedent that seemed particularly relevant now. In a whisper, she began reciting the key points of In re Gault, the Supreme Court case that established due process rights for juveniles. The constitutional guarantee of due process applies to proceedings in which juveniles are charged as delinquents. Notice of charges, right to counsel, right to confrontation and cross-examination of witnesses, privilege against self-incrimination. Her voice grew quieter as she continued, but the words were clear and precise. Each sentence was a reminder of what should be happening, of how the system was supposed to work. The familiar legal language helped center her thoughts, even as the reality of her situation pressed in around her. Rolling onto her side, Kendra faced the cell wall. Her final words before falling into an uneasy silence were barely audible. They're not supposed to do this. The holding cell remained cold and impersonal, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows through the bars. Outside, the officers continued their rounds. Mrs. Latham's heels clicked down other corridors, and somewhere, a 13-year-old boy still sat huddled in his corner, waiting for someone to remember his rights. The harsh fluorescent lights of the holding cell gave way to the cold morning sun as officers led Kendra through the courthouse corridors. The shackles around her ankles clinked with each step, a metallic rhythm that echoed off the marble floors. Despite having barely slept, her mind remained sharp, cataloging every detail of her surroundings with practiced precision. The Fulton County Family Court looked more like a museum than a place of justice, with its high ceilings and dark wood paneling. Kendra's shoes squeaked against the polished floor as the officers guided her into courtroom 3B. The room smelled of old books and furniture polish, with morning light streaming through tall windows that cast long shadows across the floor. As they positioned her at the defendant's table, Kendra caught sight of her mother, Nia, standing in the back corner of the courtroom. Her mother's usual confident posture was gone, replaced by slumped shoulders and trembling hands clutching her purse. Even from this distance, Kendra could see her mother's eyes were swollen and red, evidence of a sleepless night spent crying. Their gazes met briefly, but before either could communicate anything more, a stern-faced bailiff stepped between them. "No contact with family members before the hearing," he barked, positioning himself to block their view of each other. The courtroom clock ticked steadily toward 8 a.m. Other people filtered in, Court reporters, clerks, a few observers in the gallery. Kendra sat perfectly still, her back straight, despite the exhaustion weighing on her limbs. The shackles felt unnecessarily heavy on her small frame, but she refused to show any discomfort. At precisely 8 a.m., the bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise. The Honorable Judge Ronald Mercer presiding." Judge Mercer entered through his chamber doors, his black robe flowing behind him like a dark cloud. He was tall and imposing, with steel-gray hair and deep-set eyes that seemed to judge everything they fell upon. His movements were deliberate and old-fashioned, reminiscent of judges from another era. As he settled into his high-backed chair, his presence filled the courtroom with an almost tangible tension. "Be seated," he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of decades on the bench. He barely glanced at the case file before him before fixing Kendra with a stern look. "We're here for the preliminary hearing of Kendra Morgan, charged with resisting arrest and interfering with a police officer in the performance of his duties." Judge Mercer's tone grew harder as he continued. "The report indicates aggressive behavior toward law enforcement, unruly conduct, and what I would characterize as dangerously defiant actions. This kind of disrespect for authority cannot be tolerated." Kendra raised her hand slightly, waiting to be acknowledged. When Judge Mercer nodded curtly, she spoke in clear, measured tones. "Your Honor, I respectfully need to address several procedural violations. According to In Re Galt, juvenile defendants are entitled to specific due process rights, including proper notification of charges and representation by counsel. Additionally, the Miranda warnings dash." "That's quite enough." Judge Mercer cut her off, his face reddening. "This court will not be lectured by a juvenile defendant who's clearly been fed leftist nonsense about the law." "Sir," Kendra continued, her voice remaining steady, "the Supreme Court's ruling in Re Galt specifically states—" "Young lady," Mercer interrupted again, rising from his chair, "you're merely parroting phrases you don't understand. This case falls clearly under the doctrine of qualified immunity, as established in Harlow versus—" "Your Honor," Kendra interjected respectfully but firmly, "you're incorrectly interpreting Harlow versus Fitzgerald. The Supreme Court actually limited qualified immunity in cases where—" The sound of Judge Mercer's chair scraping back echoed through the courtroom. In 3 long strides, he crossed from behind his bench to where Kendra sat. Before anyone could react, his hand flew through the air, connecting with her cheek in a sharp crack that seemed to freeze time itself. Gasps erupted throughout the courtroom. Someone in the gallery let out a muffled cry. From the back corner, Naya's sharp intake of breath cut through the sudden silence like a knife. Kendra didn't flinch. She didn't cry. Instead, with deliberate movements, she reached down to her ankle, fingers finding the cleverly concealed zipper her mother had sewn into her sock during their weekly sewing sessions. The small phone slipped easily into her palm. Judge Mercer stood over her, still red-faced and breathing heavily, as Kendra's fingers moved swiftly across the phone's screen. She typed a number she knew by heart and composed a simple message. It happened. As her thumb pressed send, Judge Mercer's expression transformed. The anger drained from his face, replaced by something else. Recognition, then fear. His eyes darted to the back of the courtroom where they locked with Nia's gaze. Something passed between them, an unspoken understanding that seemed to carry the weight of years of buried history. The bailiff lunged forward, reaching for the phone, but it was too late. The message had already disappeared into the digital ether, leaving behind a room thick with tension and unspoken truths. Kendra sat perfectly still, her cheek still stinging from the slap, as chaos erupted around her. The phone slipped from her fingers into the bailiff's waiting hand, but she knew it didn't matter anymore. Whatever was set in motion by those 2 simple words, "It happened," couldn't be stopped now. The morning sun continued to stream through the tall windows, casting stark shadows across the courtroom floor. In the silence that followed, the old clock on the wall kept ticking, marking each second of this moment that would change everything. The morning sun cast long shadows across Justice Langston Vale's desk in his Supreme Court office. The rich mahogany furniture and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves created an atmosphere of timeless dignity, matching the careful precision with which he reviewed the stack of briefs before him. His reading glasses perched on the edge of his nose as he made careful notations in the margins, his fountain pen moving with measured strokes. The soft buzz of his secure phone interrupted his concentration. He glanced at the screen, and two simple words made his steady hand falter. It happened. Ms. Juno, his secretary of 15 years, noticed the change in his demeanor from her desk just outside his open door. She had learned to read the subtle shifts in his usually composed expression. "Justice Vale," she called softly, her voice carrying concern. "Is everything all right?" He looked up, his face a careful mask of calm despite the storm brewing beneath. "Yes, thank you, Ms. Juno. I need a moment, please." His voice remained steady, but there was an edge to it that she rarely heard. The heavy door closed with a soft click, and Justice Vale sat motionless for several seconds, staring at those two words on his screen. His hands, which had never wavered during the most contentious Supreme Court arguments, trembled slightly as he set the phone down. Rising from his desk with deliberate slowness, he moved to the far corner of his office where an old safe was hidden behind a painting of the original Supreme Court building. His fingers moved automatically, entering the combination he had chosen years ago, the date of his brother's death. The safe door opened silently, revealing neat rows of files and documents. Near the back, partially hidden behind more recent papers, sat a thick manila folder marked simply, Mercer, 2006. He hadn't touched it in years, but he had never forgotten its presence, like a wound that refused to fully heal. Justice Vale carried the folder back to his desk, his movements measured and controlled. Inside, the contents told a story he had tried to bury, sealed internal memos revealing judicial misconduct, a draft of a dissenting opinion that never saw the light of day, and photographs that made his jaw clench. The images showed Judge Ronald Mercer at private fundraising events, smiling and shaking hands with men whose organizations the Southern Poverty Law Center had identified as white nationalist groups. In one particular photo, Mercer stood between two prominent donors, their casual poses belying the weight of what the image represented. Vale spread the documents across his desk, each piece a reminder of choices made and silence kept. His brother's death, Mercer's involvement, the decision to pursue systemic change instead of personal vengeance. It all led to this moment. Picking up his secure line, he dialed a number from memory. After 2 rings, a familiar voice answered. "Georgia Judicial Oversight Committee, Judge Matthews speaking." "Caroline," Vale said, his voice carrying the weight of their long professional relationship. "We need to discuss Ronald Mercer." There was a pause on the other end. "Langston, this is unexpected." "There's been an incident," he continued, carefully choosing his words. "One that might interest the committee." "What kind of incident?" "A physical assault on a minor defendant in open court." His voice remained neutral, giving no hint of his personal connection to the situation. He did not mention Kendra's name or their relationship. Any hint of his involvement could compromise everything: her future, his position, the very justice they both sought. "That's a serious allegation, Langston. Do you have proof?" "It will surface soon enough," he replied. "I suggest the committee prepare for an investigation. The documentation I provided in 2006 might become relevant again." The conversation concluded with professional courtesy, but both understood the gravity of what had been set in motion. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, Judge Ronald Mercer sat alone in his chambers, the heavy drapes drawn against the morning light. His hand, the one that had struck Kendra, shook as he poured himself a glass of water. The crystal tumbler clinked against his teeth as he drank. His private computer hummed to life, and he opened an encrypted browser, one he used for sensitive research. In the search bar, he typed, "Langston Vale Niece." The results showed nothing unusual: standard biographical information about the Supreme Court justice, mentions of his professional accomplishments, carefully curated personal details. But Mercer's instincts, honed by decades on the bench, screamed at him. He remembered the girl's composure, her precise legal knowledge, the way she had stood her ground. But most of all, he remembered her eyes. Eyes that held the same unflinching determination he had seen in Langston Vale during their last confrontation years ago. The silence in the courtroom after he had struck her played back in his mind. She hadn't cried, hadn't cowered. She had simply reached for her phone, as if she had been waiting for exactly this moment. And that message, it happened, carried the weight of a carefully laid trap. Mercer closed the browser and leaned back in his leather chair. The realization settled over him like a heavy shroud. The girl wasn't just another smart kid with an attitude. She was Vale's blood. And with that simple two-word text, she had just declared war. The afternoon sun filtered through the narrow window of the juvenile detention cell, casting harsh shadows across the institutional green walls. Kendra sat motionless on the thin mattress, her back straight against the cold concrete wall. Her muscles ached from the taser's aftermath, but her face remained composed, almost eerily calm. A nurse in light blue scrubs moved methodically around her, checking vital signs with practiced efficiency. The blood pressure cuff squeezed Kendra's arm, but she barely noticed. Her attention was fixed on the small television visible through the open door of the staff break room across the hall. The screen showed silent footage of protesters filling Atlanta's streets. Though the demonstration had nothing to do with her case, the images resonated deeply. Young black faces confronting lines of police, signs held high, voices unheard behind the muted screen. One young woman's expression particularly caught Kendra's attention, the same mix of determination and weariness she felt in her own heart. "Any lingering numbness?" the nurse asked, breaking into Kendra's thoughts. Her voice was professional, but not unkind. "No," Kendra replied quietly, her eyes still on the television. The nurse made a note on her clipboard. "How about headache? Dizziness?" "I'm fine." Kendra's voice was steady, betraying none of the exhaustion that pulled at her bones. The nurse paused, studying her young patient's face. "You know, it's okay not to be fine." Kendra finally turned to meet the nurse's gaze. "Being fine is all I have right now." Before the nurse could respond, a guard appeared at the cell door. "Morgan, your mother's here for visitation." The small visitation room was stark and institutional, with a metal table bolted to the floor and uncomfortable plastic chairs. A guard stood by the door, maintaining what they called visual supervision. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everyone in an unflattering pallor. Nia Morgan entered with measured steps, her postal worker's uniform still on from her shift. Her eyes quickly took in her daughter's appearance, the slight stiffness in her movements, the faint mark on her cheek where Mercer had struck her. Mother and daughter locked eyes, volumes passing between them in silence. Nia sat down across from Kendra, her hands folded carefully on the table. She didn't ask how Kendra was doing or if she was okay. They both knew better than to waste their precious 10 minutes on questions with obvious answers. Instead, Nia leaned forward slightly and spoke in a low voice just above a whisper. "You called him, didn't you?" Kendra gave a small nod, her eyes never leaving her mother's face. Nia's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Baby, listen to me carefully," she said, her voice carrying years of unspoken history. "Don't trust your uncle blindly. You don't know everything that happened between us." Something flickered in Kendra's eyes, curiosity perhaps, or concern. But before she could respond, Nia continued, "There are things about that time, about your father's death." She glanced at the guard and lowered her voice further. "Things aren't always what they seem." The guard shifted, checking his watch. 2 minutes. Outside the visitation room in the courthouse proper, life continued its normal rhythm. The court clerk, a middle-aged woman named Patricia, sat at her desk, her fingers hovering over her personal phone. She had witnessed the morning's events in Judge Mercer's courtroom, had seen his hand strike Kendra's face. The sound had echoed through the suddenly silent room, but no one had moved. No one had spoken. Now, with trembling fingers, she typed a message to her college friend who worked at the ACLU. "Need to report incident. Judge struck juvenile defendant in open court. No names yet. Need guidance." Back in the detention center, night had fallen. The fluorescent lights dimmed to their evening setting, casting long shadows through the cell block. Kendra lay on her bunk, staring at the ceiling, reciting Supreme Court precedents in her head to stay focused, to keep her mind sharp. The sound of footsteps approached, the regular evening rounds. A detention officer appeared at her cell performing the standard check. As he turned to leave, his hand moved quickly, almost imperceptibly. Something small clattered softly onto the floor of her cell. Kendra waited until the footsteps faded before moving. There, by the cell door, lay a basic burner phone, the kind sold in convenience stores. She picked it up carefully, making sure to angle her body to block the security camera's view. The phone had one message: "Everything changes tomorrow." 55. Kendra's fingers moved swiftly, deleting the message with practiced efficiency. She knew Mercer would be watching her every move, would have people monitoring everything. The phone felt both dangerous and precious in her hands, a lifeline and a potential weapon. She slipped the phone into the clever hiding spot her mother had sewn into her clothes, the same type of modification that had allowed her to keep her original phone in court. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was holding another secret phone, while somewhere in this building Judge Mercer was likely already setting plans in motion to monitor her more closely. The night settled around her like a heavy blanket. In cells nearby, other young detainees shifted and murmured in their sleep. Kendra remained awake, her mind racing despite her exhaustion. Her cheek no longer stung from Mercer's slap, but she could still feel the impact, not of his hand, but of what that moment had set in motion. Through her cell window she could see a sliver of the Atlanta skyline, lights twinkling in the distance. Somewhere out there, her uncle was making moves on a chessboard she could only partially see. Her mother's warning echoed in her mind, mixing with the memory of that cryptic text message. Tomorrow loomed ahead, full of unknown possibilities and hidden dangers. She closed her eyes not to sleep but to think, to plan, to prepare. The burner phone pressed against her side through the hidden pocket, a constant reminder of the forces now in motion. Whatever came tomorrow, she would face it with the same composure that had carried her through today. It was all she had, that and the law she held so dear. In his private chambers within the Supreme Court building, Justice Langston Vail sat at a heavy mahogany table with three of his most trusted legal clerks. Morning light streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across stacks of meticulously organized documents. The air felt thick with tension and the weight of history. Vail's hands, usually steady and sure, trembled slightly as he distributed copies of a document that had haunted him for 15 years. The paper was marked with thick black redaction lines, but the essential details remained clear. A scathing dissent he had written in 2006, challenging Judge Mercer's disturbing pattern of racial bias in sentencing. "This never made it to the public record," Vail explained, his voice carrying the weight of long-held regret. "Political pressure and other factors led to its suppression." He watched as his clerk's eyes widened while scanning the pages. Sarah Chen, his senior clerk, spoke first. "Sir, these statistics are damning. The racial disparity in Mercer's juvenile sentencing alone would have raised serious questions about his fitness for the bench." "That was the point," Vail replied, removing his reading glasses and pinching the bridge of his nose. But certain members of the Judicial Nomination Committee had other plans. Marcus Thompson, the youngest clerk, leaned forward. "Justice Vail, with respect, why bring this forward now? The timing." "Will look suspicious," completed Rebecca Martinez, the third clerk. Her expression was concerned as she carefully arranged her thoughts. "If you move now, they'll accuse you of weaponizing the court for family. The connection to Kendra will become public and both your credibilities could be compromised." Vail stood and walked to his window, looking out over the Washington morning. The city was already bustling, unaware of the moral struggle playing out in this quiet room. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper, an email printed long ago, its creases worn from frequent handling. "This was the last message I received from my sister, Nia," he said, unfolding it carefully. "She sent it the day before Mercer's confirmation hearing." He began to read aloud. "Langston, I'm begging you one last time. Don't let them confirm him. You've seen what he does to our children in his courtroom. He's a smiling executioner in a black robe, and you know it. If you stay silent now, I don't know how we come back from this." The room fell silent. Vail turned back to face his clerks, his decision evident in his expression. "Sarah," he said, addressing his senior clerk, "I need you to begin a comprehensive review of Mercer's case history. Focus on juvenile cases, particularly those involving minority defendants. Look for sentencing disparities, procedural irregularities, anything that shows a pattern." Sarah nodded, already pulling out her laptop. "What parameters should I use for the search?" "Go back 15 years. Pay special attention to cases where the punishment seemed disproportionate to the offense. And Sarah?" Vale's voice carried a note of urgency. "This needs to be absolutely bulletproof. Every statistic, every citation, every conclusion needs to be unimpeachable." Marcus raised his hand slightly. "Sir, what about the current situation, the incident with Kendra?" "We don't touch that directly," Vale replied firmly. "This isn't about one case or one girl. This is about a pattern of behavior that's gone unchecked for far too long." Rebecca began organizing the documents into distinct piles. "We should also look into any connections between Mercer and certain political donors. The timing of campaign contributions, speaking engagements, private meetings." "Agreed," Vale said. "But remember, we're not launching an investigation. We're simply gathering information that's already public record." His emphasis on these last words carried clear meaning to everyone in the room. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, Judge Ronald Mercer paced the length of his private conference room. 5 members of his judicial advisory team sat around the long table, their expressions tense. Morning sunlight struggled to penetrate the drawn blinds, creating an appropriately shadowy atmosphere for the crisis meeting. "Where is this footage?" Mercer demanded, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "Who had phones in my courtroom?" Patricia Whitman, his senior advisor, consulted her notes. "Security protocols were followed, Your Honor. All visible devices were collected before the hearing, but..." "But what?" Mercer stopped pacing to glare at her. "But we can't rule out hidden devices, and there are rumors circulating among the court staff." Mercer slammed his hand down on the table, causing everyone to jump. "Rumors? I don't care about rumors. I care about containing this situation before it explodes in our faces." David Chen, his media relations coordinator, cleared his throat. "Sir, we might want to consider getting ahead of this." A statement acknowledging Dash. "Acknowledging what?" Mercer cut him off. "That I maintained order in my courtroom? That I dealt with an unruly defendant who showed complete disrespect for judicial authority?" "She's 15, Your Honor," Patricia said quietly. Mercer's eyes narrowed. "She's a problem, and problems need to be contained." He turned to James Harrison, his security chief. "I want surveillance on her. Everyone who visits, everyone who calls, everyone who so much as looks in her direction. I want to know what she's planning." "Sir," James shifted uncomfortably, "there are strict protocols regarding juvenile detention monitoring." "I don't care about protocols." Mercer's voice rose sharply. "That girl is a threat. She has connections we don't fully understand yet, and I want to know exactly what we're dealing with." The room fell silent. Mercer returned to his pacing, his footsteps echoing in the tense quiet. Finally, he stopped at the head of the table. "Listen to me, all of you," he said, his voice now dangerously calm. "We need to contain this now. If any footage exists, I want it found and destroyed. If anyone talks to the press, I want to know about it immediately. And most importantly," he paused, making eye contact with each person in the room, "I want to know everything about Kendra Morgan's visitors, her phone calls, her mail, everything. Is that clear?" The team nodded in unison, none daring to voice their concerns about the legality or ethics of such surveillance. "Good," Mercer said, straightening his robes. "Now get to work. I want updates every hour." As his team filed out, Mercer remained standing at the head of the table, staring at his reflection in the polished wood. The morning light caught his face at an angle, highlighting the deep lines of worry that no amount of judicial authority could erase. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Kendra's front lawn as she stepped out of the police vehicle. Her ankle monitor felt heavy and foreign, a constant reminder of her new reality. Camera flashes erupted like lightning, and reporters shouted questions that blurred together into an overwhelming roar. "Kendra, How do you respond to Judge Mercer's claims? Did you intentionally provoke the incident? What message are you trying to send? Nia Morgan moved swiftly, her arm wrapping protectively around her daughter's shoulders. Her face was set in determined lines as she guided Kendra through the chaos. The reporters pressed closer, microphones thrust forward like weapons. "No comments," Nia said firmly, her voice carrying over the din. "My daughter is a minor. Back up." They reached the front door, and Nia quickly ushered Kendra inside. The door slammed shut with a satisfying thud, muffling the persistent questions from outside. For a moment, they both stood in the entryway, catching their breath. The familiar sense of home, lavender air freshener and the lingering aroma of Nia's morning coffee, helped ease some of the tension from Kendra's shoulders. "You okay, baby?" Nia asked softly, studying her daughter's face. Kendra nodded, already moving with purpose toward her room. "I need my laptop." Her bedroom was exactly as she'd left it 3 days ago. Neat and organized, with civil rights posters on the walls and a small bookshelf filled with legal texts. She pulled her laptop from its charging station and settled cross-legged on her bed. The familiar startup sound brought a sense of comfort. Kendra navigated to her encrypted cloud drive where months of research lay carefully categorized in nested folders. What had started as a simple school project on judicial sentencing patterns had evolved into something far more significant. "Project Justice," she whispered, opening the main folder. Inside were hundreds of case files, all Mercer's rulings, meticulously downloaded from public records and analyzed. She'd originally chosen him because he had the longest serving record, making him perfect for identifying historical patterns. Now she understood it had been more than coincidence. Kendra's fingers flew across the keyboard as she refined her search parameters. The AI analysis tool she'd been using for her project, a gift from a tech-savvy cousin, hummed to life. She input specific criteria: juvenile cases, non-violent offenses, sentencing outcomes. The results made her stomach turn. 10 cases immediately stood out, their statistics glaring. In each one, Black teenagers had received sentences 5 times longer than white teens charged with nearly identical offenses. The disparity was so stark it couldn't be coincidental. She opened a new document and began copying relevant excerpts from Mercer's rulings. The AI tool highlighted recurring phrases, showing clear patterns in his language choices. When describing Black defendants, terms like urban aggression and cultural instability appeared with disturbing frequency. White defendants, by contrast, were often described with phrases like temporary lapse in judgment or potential for rehabilitation. "Mom?" Kendra called out, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Can you look at something?" Nia appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "What is it?" "Look at these numbers." Kendra turned the screen. "And these phrases he keeps using. It's not just bias, it's systematic. He's been doing this for years." Nia's expression darkened as she scanned the data. Her hands gripped the towel tighter, knuckles whitening. "I know," she said quietly. "I've known for a long time." The kitchen timer buzzed, breaking the heavy moment. "Come on," Nia said, straightening up. "Time for dinner. You need to eat something proper after that detention center food." They sat at their small kitchen table, steam rising from bowls of Nia's homemade vegetable soup. The reporters outside had finally dispersed, leaving an uneasy quiet broken only by the gentle clink of spoons against bowls. Kendra stirred her soup thoughtfully, gathering courage for the question that had been nagging at her. "Mom?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you stop working in court reform?" The spoon in Nia's hand froze halfway to her mouth. She set it down slowly, her eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the kitchen window. "Because it nearly got someone killed," she replied, her voice heavy with old pain. Before Kendra could press further, a soft buzz came from her pocket. She pulled out the burner phone, the one that had mysteriously appeared in detention. A new message notification blinked on the screen. With slightly trembling fingers, she opened it. A photo filled the screen, clearly taken within the last hour. Judge Mercer stood in a shadowy alley behind what looked like the courthouse, Deep in conversation with a well-dressed man Kendra recognized from news coverage, District Attorney Calden Briggs. Their body language spoke of familiarity and shared purpose. Kendra's eyes snapped to her mother, who was still lost in thought. She knew from her research that Briggs had been her mother's primary opponent during her court reform days. The man who had systematically dismantled community justice programs and replaced them with harsh law and order policies. The pieces clicked into place. Old alliances weren't just being remembered, they were being actively revived. Mercer and Briggs working together again, just like they had during her mother's fight for reform. The burner phone felt heavy in her hand as she stared at the image, understanding blooming like a dark flower in her mind. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about power, about systems, about battles fought long before she'd entered the picture. The autumn air carried a crisp chill as Justice Langston Vail stepped onto Emory University's historic campus. His measured stride and distinguished bearing drew respectful nods from passing students, none of whom suspected his true purpose in Atlanta. The lecture on constitutional law he was scheduled to deliver later that afternoon was merely a carefully constructed facade. Vail checked his watch. 10:45 a.m. He had precisely 15 minutes before his arranged meeting. Making his way through the less trafficked paths between academic buildings, he arrived at a small coffee shop tucked away in the basement of the law library. The location had been chosen with purpose, quiet enough for privacy, public enough to avoid suspicion. Risa McLean was already there, seated in a corner booth with her back to the wall. Her sharp eyes tracked Vail's approach over the rim of her coffee cup. She hadn't changed much since their days arguing cases together, still wore her silver hair in a practical bob, still carried herself with the same quiet intensity that had made her such an effective prosecutor before she turned to journalism. "It's been a while, Langston," she said softly as he slid into the booth. Vail nodded, placing his briefcase on the table between them. "Thank you for meeting me, Risa. I trust you understand the need for discretion." "Always." She set down her cup, eyes focusing on the briefcase. "What's so important you couldn't send through secure channels?" Vail opened the briefcase with practiced precision, removing a thick manila envelope. His fingers lingered on the seal for a moment before he passed it across the table. Documentation regarding Judge Ronald Mercer, specifically his pattern of discriminatory sentencing and abuse of power. Risa's eyebrows lifted slightly as she examined the contents. "These are internal court memos. Sealed dissents. How did you—" "The source isn't relevant," Vail cut in smoothly. "What matters is the content. I need these facts published, but not traced back to the judiciary. Your reputation for protecting sources is why I came to you." "This is explosive stuff, Langston." Risa's eyes narrowed as she scanned a particular document. "But why now? These patterns go back years." Vail's expression remained carefully neutral, though his fingers tightened imperceptibly on his coffee cup. Sometimes justice requires careful timing. Across town, in the quiet corner of a public library, Kendra Morgan sat waiting at a study table partially hidden by tall shelves. Her heart jumped when Malik appeared, slipping quietly into the chair across from her. His usually neat appearance was slightly disheveled from days of laying low. "You okay?" she whispered, reaching across to squeeze his hand. Malik gave a tight nod. "Been staying with different friends, switching locations. The media's been camping outside our house." His voice dropped even lower. "But that's not what I came to tell you. Mercer and Briggs, they're trying to spin this, making up stories about us being part of some gang-affiliated protest group." Kendra's jaw tightened, but she wasn't surprised. "They're desperate," she said, pulling out her laptop. "And that desperation is going to be their downfall. Look at what I've gathered." She opened multiple folders, showing Malik the carefully organized evidence. Audio recordings from court sessions, transcript analyses, detailed breakdowns of sentencing patterns. His eyes widened as he took in the scope of her research. "This is incredible," he murmured, scrolling through the data. "But how do we use it?" A small smile touched Kendra's lips. "I've been thinking about that. We don't just file a lawsuit, we put his whole career on trial, but not before traditional judges." She leaned forward, excitement creeping into her whispered voice. We organize a panel of young legal scholars trained in constitutional law and civil rights. Let them review every case, every pattern, every decision. Make it impossible to ignore the evidence. Malik studied his sister's face, recognizing the fierce intelligence burning behind her calm exterior. "You're not just fighting the battle they expect," he said slowly. "You're changing the whole game." "Exactly." Kendra began closing the files. They're ready for protests, for traditional legal challenges. They're not ready for this. Later that night, as Kendra and Nia prepared for bed, a soft scraping sound came from beneath their front door. Nia moved cautiously to investigate, finding a plain manila envelope that had been slid underneath. No return address, no markings of any kind. They sat together at the kitchen table as Nia carefully opened it. Inside were court transcripts, yellowed with age but still clearly legible. The date at the top read 1997. As they read through the pages, the story emerged. A criminal trial where Mercer had served as defense counsel for police officers accused of causing a death in custody. The victim was a black teenager. Kendra's breath caught as she reached the final page. There, in stark black type, was the victim's name, Devin L. Vale. She looked up at her mother, who had gone very still. "Mom," Kendra said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Was Devin related to Uncle Langston?" Nia's eyes remained closed for a long moment. When she finally opened them, they were filled with old pain. His little brother. The kitchen fell silent except for the soft ticking of the wall clock. The truth of the documents settled over them like a heavy blanket, not just evidence of injustice, but a revelation of deep personal connection. The pieces of their family history, long kept separate, were finally connecting. The kitchen felt impossibly small as Kendra sat at the worn wooden table, her fingers tracing the edges of the court documents. The revelation about Devin Vale hung in the air like a physical presence. Steam rose from the mugs of chamomile tea Nia methodically prepared, her hands trembling slightly as she placed them on the table. Malik couldn't stay still. He moved back and forth across the narrow kitchen, his footsteps creating a steady rhythm against the linoleum floor. "This doesn't make sense," he said, running his hands through his short curls. "Why would Mercer defend the cop who killed Uncle Langston's brother? And why didn't anyone tell us about this?" Kendra watched her mother's face carefully. Nia stood at the counter, her back straight but her shoulders tense. When she finally turned around, her eyes held a mixture of pain and resignation. "Sit down, Malik," Nia said softly. "There's more to this story than what's in those papers." Malik dropped into the chair next to Kendra, his knee bouncing with nervous energy. Nia wrapped her hands around her mug, as if drawing strength from its warmth. "Devin Vale was brilliant," she began, her voice taking on a distant quality. "He was only 15, but he was already taking college courses. Straight A student, volunteered at the library, helped tutor younger kids." She paused, taking a slow breath. "One night he got picked up for being out past curfew, just walking home from the library where he studied late. They were supposed to take him to juvenile detention for processing." Kendra's hand found Malik's under the table, squeezing tight. Their mother's words painted a picture too familiar, too close to home. "The official report said he became combative during transport," Nia continued, her voice hardening. "But witnesses saw the officer pull over and drag Devin from the car. They heard him screaming that he couldn't breathe." Her knuckles went white around the mug. By the time they reached the detention center, Devin was unconscious. He never woke up. The kitchen fell silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. Kendra felt her heart pounding against her ribs as she thought about the parallels. Another black teenager, another abuse of power, another cover-up. "Langston was making a name for himself back then," Nia went on. "He'd just finished a clerkship, was being noticed by the right people. When Devin died, he wanted to fight. He wanted to tear the whole system apart." She shook her head slowly. "But the senior judges he'd worked for, the ones grooming him for bigger things, they advised him to step back. Said he could do more good by working his way up, changing things from the inside. And he listened? Malik's voice cracked with disbelief. He made a choice, Nia said quietly. One that haunts him every day. He decided to play the long game, to get into a position where he could actually change the system. But it cost him his relationship with your grandparents, with me. She looked down at her hands. We couldn't understand how he could just watch while Mercer got that officer acquitted. Kendra's mind was racing, connecting dots she hadn't seen before. That's why Mercer slapped me in court, she said slowly. It wasn't just about me citing cases or challenging his authority. When he realized who I was, he was afraid, Nia finished. Afraid that the past would come back. Afraid that everything he'd buried would finally come to light. Kendra stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I need my laptop. She retrieved it from her room, bringing it back to the kitchen table. Opening it, she created a new email, her fingers hovering over the keyboard for a moment before she began to type. Dear Uncle Langston, she wrote, choosing her words carefully. Today I learned about Devin, about what happened to him, and about the choice you had to make. I'm not writing to ask for your help or to judge your decision. What I need is information, specifically the complete court file from Devin's case. Everything that was sealed, everything that was buried. Not for revenge, but for justice. Not just for Devin, but for every kid who's faced what he did. She attached a secure Dropbox link, then added, I understand if you can't help. But I want you to know that I'm going to fight this battle either way. The only question is whether I'll have all the weapons I need. After encrypting the email with a key they'd established earlier, she clicked send. The soft whoosh of the outgoing message seemed to echo in the quiet kitchen. Without pausing, Kendra opened a new document. At the top, she typed, Tribunal Proposal Draft V1. Her fingers moved steadily across the keyboard as Malik and Nia watched in silence, understanding that something significant was taking shape. The kitchen clock ticked steadily as Kendra worked, its rhythm matching the soft tapping of keys. Outside, distant sirens wailed, a reminder of the world they were trying to change. But in this moment, in this small kitchen, 3 people sat together, united by newly uncovered truth and the determination to use it. The morning sun had barely risen when Kendra's phone started buzzing nonstop. News alerts flooded her screen, all linking to the same source. A bombshell investigative piece by Risa McClain in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. The headline read, Pattern of Prejudice. Senior Judge's History of Discriminatory Sentencing Revealed. Kendra sat cross-legged on her bed, scanning the article with growing intensity. McClain's reporting was meticulous, laying out years of data showing how Judge Mercer had consistently handed down harsher sentences to black and brown youth compared to white defendants with similar charges. Though no names were mentioned, the statistical evidence was damning. Mom, Kendra called out, her voice carrying through their small house. You need to see this. Nia appeared in the doorway, already dressed for work, her phone also in hand. I'm seeing it everywhere, she said quietly. Social media is blowing up. The article detailed specific cases, dates, charges, and sentencing disparities, all carefully anonymized but painting a clear picture. A section about Mercer's early career as a defense attorney highlighted his pattern of representing law enforcement in misconduct cases. Though Devin Vale's case wasn't named directly, the article mentioned a tragic 1997 incident involving a minor who died in custody. Across town in the marble halls of the courthouse, Judge Ronald Mercer's chambers had descended into chaos. Papers scattered across his desk as he paced the room, his face flushed with rage. 2 young clerks stood nervously by the door while his senior clerk, Thompson, tried to manage the crisis. Who leaked these records? Mercer demanded, slamming his hand on his desk. These were sealed. Protected. His voice cracked with barely controlled fury. Thompson cleared his throat. Sir, the statistics were all publicly available. Someone just compiled them. Someone? Mercer spun around. This is a coordinated attack. First that girl in court, now this. He pointed at the 2 junior clerks. You 2, out. You're fired. Clear your desks immediately. The clerks hurried out, leaving Thompson alone with Mercer's growing rage. Mercer grabbed his phone, fingers trembling as he dialed a familiar number. "Briggs, we need something on the girl. Now." His voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "I don't care what it takes. Find something we can use." District Attorney Calden Briggs's smooth voice came through the speaker. "Already working on it. But Ronald, we need to be careful. If this connects back to the Vale case—" "Don't say that name," Mercer snapped, glancing around as if the walls might be listening. "Just handle it." Meanwhile, at the Morgan house, a courier arrived at the front door. The man wore a plain uniform and carried a simple manila envelope. "Delivery for Kendra Morgan," he announced when Nia answered. Kendra appeared behind her mother, recognizing the careful handwriting on the envelope. She signed for it with steady hands, though her heart raced. Once the door was closed, she broke the seal. Inside was a thick file, its edges worn with age. A small note on Justice Vale's personal stationery sat on top. "The truth deserves light. Use it wisely." Malik joined them as Kendra spread the contents across their kitchen table. Medical reports, witness statements, police interviews, crime scene photos. All of it had been buried before Devon Vale's case ever went to trial. The medical examiner's original report showed clear signs of assault, bruising patterns inconsistent with the officer's story of self-defense. Witness statements described hearing Devon cry out for help, begging someone to call his brother. There were even internal police memos questioning the officer's history of excessive force. Kendra read each document carefully, her face growing more drawn with each page. Malik stood behind her, his hands gripping the back of her chair until his knuckles went white. "They knew," Kendra whispered. "They had all this evidence and they still let him go." The photos were the hardest to look at. Devon Vale's young face, so similar to Malik's, frozen in death. The bruises on his neck, the scrapes on his hands where he'd tried to protect himself. Malik's voice was thick with emotion when he finally spoke. "We have to make him pay." Kendra looked up at her brother, then at her mother. She saw the same pain in their eyes, the same need for justice, but she also saw something else. Fear. Fear of what speaking up might cost them. She turned to her laptop, which sat open on the counter. "We do this smart," she said, opening a secure connection to a private server she knew well, one used by high school mock trial teams across the country. Her fingers moved swiftly over the keyboard as she created a new folder. The Pattern of Silence, Mercer Case Study. She began uploading carefully redacted versions of the documents, removing names but leaving the damning facts. The medical evidence, the witness statements, the pattern of cover-ups. "What are you doing?" Malik asked, leaning over her shoulder. "Creating a case study," Kendra replied, her voice steady. "Every mock trial team in the country uses this server to practice. They're all future lawyers, future judges. They need to see how the system really works." The upload bar moved slowly across the screen. With each percentage point, more truth entered the digital world. More eyes would see what had been hidden. More minds would understand what they were fighting against. When the upload completed, Kendra sat back in her chair. The digital fuse was lit. There was no turning back now. The afternoon sun filtered through Kendra's bedroom window as she double-checked her laptop's security settings. Her hands moved swiftly across the keyboard, making final adjustments to the encrypted video conference platform she'd spent days configuring. The clock on her screen showed 3:55 p.m., 5 minutes until the most important meeting of her young life. She glanced at the list of participants waiting in the virtual lobby. 12 names, each representing some of the brightest young legal minds in the country. There was Maya Chen from California, who'd won the National Constitutional Debate Championship 3 years running. Marcus Rodriguez from Texas, whose AI-assisted analysis of Fourth Amendment violations had caught the attention of law professors nationwide. Sarah Thompson from Massachusetts, already famous in youth legal circles for her work on juvenile justice reform. At exactly 4 p.m., Kendra took a deep breath and clicked Start Meeting. One by one, faces appeared on her screen. 12 teenagers in their bedrooms, home offices, and study spaces across America. Some looked nervous, others determined. All of them had responded to her carefully worded invitation about addressing systemic judicial misconduct through peer review. "Thank you all for joining," Kendra began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I know many of you had to sign additional NDAs and verify your identities through secure channels. That level of caution is necessary for what I'm about to propose." She shared her screen, displaying a meticulously organized digital folder structure. What you're looking at is evidence of systematic bias and misconduct by a sitting family court judge. The data spans 20 years and includes everything from sentencing statistics to suppressed evidence in critical cases. Maya Chen leaned forward in her video window. "Is this about Judge Mercer? We've been following the news reports." Kendra nodded. "Yes, but what's been reported is just the surface. I have access to much more, including sealed documents that reveal a pattern of racial bias and procedural violations dating back to his days as a defense attorney." She navigated through several subfolders, showing them glimpses of court transcripts, statistical analyses, and case summaries. The other teens watched intently, some taking notes, others zooming in on their screens to read the details. "What exactly are you proposing?" asked Marcus, adjusting his glasses. "These documents are compelling, but what can we actually do?" Kendra minimized the folders and opened a new document. "I'm proposing we create our own tribunal, a formal, structured review of Mercer's most controversial cases, conducted entirely by youth legal scholars like ourselves." The video grid erupted with murmurs and raised eyebrows. Sarah Thompson spoke up first. "You want us to put a sitting judge on trial?" "Not exactly," Kendra clarified. "This would be a simulated proceeding, but one conducted with full academic rigor. We'll use data analysis, AI-assisted pattern recognition, and proper legal methodology to examine his rulings. Everything will be documented, peer-reviewed, and published with complete transparency." She shared another screen showing a detailed organizational chart. "Each of you would be assigned a specific case or aspect to investigate. We'll use secure channels for communication and evidence sharing. The goal isn't just to expose wrongdoing. It's to demonstrate that young people can engage with and critique the legal system at a professional level." Most of the faces on screen showed growing enthusiasm. Several participants were already opening notebooks or typing rapidly on their keyboards. But one voice cut through the excitement with a note of skepticism. "Why should we be judge and jury?" asked James Wilson, a mock trial champion from Michigan. "What gives us the right to pass judgment on a professional judge's decisions?" Kendra looked directly into her camera, her voice carrying the weight of personal experience. "Because we're the ones they keep judging without a voice. Every day, kids our age face judges like Mercer who see us as statistics, not people. They make decisions about our lives without understanding our reality." She pulled up a series of graphs showing youth sentencing disparities. "Look at these numbers. Black and brown teenagers consistently receiving harsher sentences for identical offenses. Juvenile defendants being denied proper representation. Constitutional rights being ignored because we're just kids." The skepticism on James's face began to fade as he studied the data. Other participants nodded in agreement, their expressions hardening with determination. "I'm sending each of you encrypted access to specific case files," Kendra continued, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Take time to review them carefully. We'll need to establish clear protocols for our proceedings, including methods for protecting sensitive information and maintaining academic integrity." One by one, the other teens received their assignments. Maya would analyze Mercer's language patterns in sentencing statements. Marcus would apply his AI tools to detect bias in procedural decisions. Sarah would focus on constitutional violations in juvenile cases. "We'll call ourselves the Youth Constitutional Tribunal of Accountability, YCTA, Kendra announced, sharing a simple but professional logo she'd designed. "All our findings will be published on a secure platform that I'm developing." The meeting continued for another hour, as they discussed logistics, security measures, and research methodologies. When the last participant signed off, Kendra felt simultaneously exhausted and energized. She'd expected resistance or hesitation, but instead found 12 allies ready to challenge the system that had failed so many of their peers. The house grew quiet as night fell. Kendra's mother had already gone to bed, leaving her alone with the soft glow of her laptop screen. She worked steadily, writing code for the tribunal's secure platform. Each line of code was a building block in what she hoped would become a powerful tool for youth advocacy and judicial accountability. Just before midnight, she opened the draft homepage for the YCTA website. The design was clean and professional, with clear navigation and secure login protocols. Her cursor hovered over the animation settings as she fine-tuned the title sequence. Letters appeared one by one across the screen, each one representing a voice that refused to be silenced. Justice begins when silence ends. The morning sun had barely risen when a sharp knock echoed through the Morgan household. Nia opened the door to find a court courier holding official documents. Her hands trembled slightly as she accepted the thick envelope, already sensing its ominous contents. Inside was a subpoena, printed on crisp legal paper, demanding her appearance before the court. As she read through the allegations, her face grew pale. Mercer's legal team had constructed an elaborate narrative, accusing her of coaching Kendra to fabricate claims of abuse and misconduct. They painted a picture of a manipulative mother using her daughter as a pawn in some twisted vendetta against the justice system. Later that morning, Nia's phone rang. It was her supervisor at the non-profit where she worked, helping families navigate the legal system. "We need to talk," the supervisor said, her voice strained. "These allegations, the board is concerned about potential liability." Nia sat at her desk, clutching the phone tightly. "Everything they're saying is false," she insisted, but she could hear the uncertainty in her supervisor's tone. The conversation ended with a temporary leave of absence, bureaucratic language for what felt like punishment. Meanwhile, across town at Carter High School, Kendra sat in the principal's office, maintaining her characteristic composure as Mr. Patterson delivered the news. "Given the ongoing investigations," he said, avoiding eye contact, "we feel it's best to remove you from your student council position." Kendra watched him shuffle papers on his desk, noting how he couldn't quite meet her gaze. "Which investigations?" she asked calmly. "The ones into Judge Mercer's conduct, or the false allegations against my mother?" The principal cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Kendra, you know we can't take sides in legal matters. This is purely procedural. Like how it was purely procedural when Judge Mercer slapped me in open court." Her voice remained steady, but her words carried weight. Mr. Patterson had no response. By midday, local news stations were broadcasting live from the courthouse steps. Judge Ronald Mercer stood at a podium, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his expression a masterful blend of indignation and wounded dignity. Camera lights flashed as he gripped the podium's edges, playing his role to perfection. "These baseless allegations represent nothing less than character assassination," he declared, his voice carrying the practiced gravitas of decades on the bench. "What we're seeing is a coordinated attack by activist radicals who seek to undermine our judicial system." Though he never mentioned Kendra by name, his implications were clear as crystal. "We're facing a troubling trend of juvenile delinquents with tech skills and too much ambition, thinking they can manipulate the system through social media and anonymous accusations." The media response fractured along predictable lines. Conservative outlets praised Mercer's brave stand against judicial harassment, while progressive channels questioned his history of controversial rulings. Social media exploded with competing hashtags: #Mercer must go versus #Stand with Judge Mercer. In a quiet corner of the public library, Malik met with two other members of the youth tribunal. His face was grim as he shared what he'd discovered. "Someone's been reaching out to tribunal members," he explained in hushed tones. "3 of them got anonymous messages offering money to walk away from the case." He pulled out his phone, showing screenshots of the messages. The offers were substantial, enough to cover college tuition for some of the teens. Each message was carefully worded to avoid explicit bribery while making the implications clear: abandon the tribunal, get paid, and avoid future complications. When Malik brought this information to Kendra's house later that afternoon, he expected her to be upset. Instead, She sat at her desk, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Good," she said, her fingers continuing to type code into her laptop. "That means he's scared?" "Scared?" Malik raised an eyebrow. "Kendra, they're trying to buy off our team." "And failing," she replied, still typing. "Not one of those 3 members took the money. They all reported it immediately." She paused, looking up at her brother. "Think about it, Malik. Mercer's getting desperate. He's using every trick he knows, legal threats, media manipulation, attempted bribery. But he's fighting us like we're adults in his world." "And we're not," Malik realized, beginning to understand her point. "Exactly," Kendra nodded. "We're fighting this battle our way, with technology, transparency, and truth. He doesn't know how to counter that." As night fell, Kendra sat alone in her room, the blue light of her laptop screen illuminating her determined expression. She opened the tribunal charter document, scrolling to its final section. With deliberate keystrokes, she added one last clause. "All rulings of this tribunal will be submitted to the Georgia Bar Association, the Judicial Review Board, and published in full public record." She read the words again, understanding their weight. This wasn't just about exposing one judge's misconduct. It was about creating a permanent record that couldn't be ignored or buried. Her cursor hovered over the save button for a moment before she clicked it decisively. "Tomorrow we go live," she whispered to the quiet room. The added clause glowed on her screen, a digital declaration of war against a system that had long operated in shadows. Outside her window, Atlanta's city lights twinkled, unaware that a 15-year-old girl was about to challenge decades of judicial impunity with nothing but truth and technology as her weapons. At precisely 8 a.m., Kendra sat before her laptop, her posture straight and composed despite the weight of the moment. The secure streaming platform she'd coded displayed a simple interface, 12 boxes arranged in a grid, waiting to be filled with the faces of young legal minds from across the nation. Her finger hovered over the Begin Stream button for just a moment before pressing down. The Youth Constitutional Tribunal of Accountability was about to make history. One by one, the boxes illuminated with faces. From Seattle, a teenage mock trial champion adjusted her blazer. From Boston, a constitutional debate medalist straightened his tie. From Miami, Atlanta, Chicago, and beyond, they appeared, each dressed formally, each carrying the serious expression of someone who understood the gravity of what they were about to do. The viewer count began to tick up slowly at first, invited participants logging in through secure channels, but then the numbers started jumping as watchers found ways to share access. Legal forums buzzed with activity, social media mentions multiplied. Kendra took a deep breath, centered herself, and began speaking into her microphone. Her voice carried the steady authority that had become her trademark. "Welcome to the first session of the Youth Constitutional Tribunal of Accountability," she said, her words clear and measured. "Before we begin examining cases, I want to make our purpose absolutely clear. This isn't about vengeance." She paused, letting the words settle. "This is about proof, truth, pattern, power. We are here to examine public records, analyze data, and present verifiable evidence of systemic disparities in our justice system. Every statement we make will be backed by documentation. Every conclusion we draw will be supported by facts." The chat section of the stream filled with messages of support, but Kendra kept her focus. "Our first case today comes from 2014, she continued, nodding to a young woman in one of the grid squares. "Julia from Chicago will present the findings." Julia, a 16-year-old with rimless glasses and tight braids, shared her screen. Court documents appeared, alongside a carefully prepared presentation. "State v. Carter 2014, Julia began. Defendant Elijah Carter, age 16, was charged with shoplifting headphones valued at $299 from an electronics store. Judge Ronald Mercer presided. She clicked through to the next slide displaying the sentencing transcript. Carter had no prior record, no aggravating circumstances. Yet Judge Mercer sentenced him to 12 years in juvenile detention, stating that the sentence would serve as a deterrent to others in his community. The chat exploded with reactions, but Julia continued methodically. Now compare this to State v. Peterson, 2013. Another transcript appeared. White defendant, Thomas Peterson, age 16, charged with stealing headphones valued at $325 from the same store chain, also presided over by Judge Mercer. She pulled up both sentencing documents side by side. Peterson received 2 years probation. Judge Mercer cited his good family background and potential for rehabilitation as factors in the lenient sentence. Data visualizations began flowing across the screen, charts showing sentencing disparities, language analysis of Mercer's statements in both cases, and a timeline of similar cases with their outcomes color-coded by race. The pattern is clear, Julia concluded. When controlling for all other factors, age, crime value, prior record, family presence in court, Black defendants in Judge Mercer's court received sentences averaging 8.4 times longer than white defendants for identical crimes. Social media was already lighting up. Legal bloggers began sharing screenshots of the data. Law professors started tweeting about the methodology. A counter-narrative quickly emerged from Mercer's supporters. Mock court nonsense, one judicial commentator dismissed it. Children playing at being lawyers, another scoffed. But they couldn't stop the spread of information. The data was too precise, the research too thorough. Every chart had downloadable source files. Every conclusion linked to public records. The youth tribunal members had done their homework with a thoroughness that put many adult legal analysts to shame. More cases followed. Each presentation built upon the last, creating an undeniable pattern of judicial bias. The viewer count continued to climb. Legal forums began referencing specific findings. Civil rights organizations started sharing clips. Through it all, Kendra maintained her role as moderator, ensuring each presentation met their rigorous standards for evidence. She kept the focus tight, never allowing speculation or emotion to override their commitment to facts and data. As the first session drew to a close, Kendra addressed the viewers one final time. "I want to remind everyone that this tribunal is non-binding," she stated clearly. "We are not a court of law. We are not passing judgment. What we are doing is presenting verified evidence that will be submitted to the Georgia Bar Association, the Judicial Review Board, and made available to the public record." She paused, making sure her next words were perfectly clear. "Every piece of evidence presented today will be independently verifiable. Every conclusion we've drawn is supported by public documents. This isn't about opinion. It's about pattern recognition. It's about data. It's about truth." With that, she ended the stream. The screen went dark except for a simple message. Session 1 complete. Evidence packets downloading. Kendra turned in her chair to face Malik, who had watched the entire session in silence from her bedroom doorway. His expression was hard to read. "Did we shake the cage?" she asked quietly. Malik shook his head slowly, a small smile forming. "No," he replied. "You rattled the lock." Later that night, Kendra sat at her desk, the glow of her laptop screen casting soft shadows across her room. A notification popped up, an incoming video call from Justice Vale. Her heart skipped a beat, but her hand remained steady as she accepted the call, her breath catching slightly in her throat. Her uncle's face appeared on screen, his usually composed features tight with concern. The wood-paneled walls of his private study formed a somber backdrop, the soft glow of an antique lamp highlighting the worry lines etched around his eyes. He leaned close to his camera, speaking in hushed tones despite being alone in the sanctuary of his home office. "They're using you to get to me," he said without preamble, his voice barely above a whisper, tension evident in every syllable. "They've filed an ethics complaint. If I get pulled into this, I lose the ability to protect you quietly. The connections I've spent decades building will be useless." Kendra absorbed this information with characteristic stillness, her shoulders squared despite the weight of his words. The warm light from her desk lamp caught the fading mark on her cheek where Mercer had struck her, a purple-yellow reminder of what speaking truth to power had already cost her. She studied her uncle's face, the same sharp intelligence she saw in the mirror, weathered by decades of careful navigation through political minefields and compromises she was only beginning to understand. "You knew this might happen," she said. It wasn't a question, but a quiet acknowledgement of the chess game they were both playing. "I did." He rubbed his temples, looking suddenly older, the burden of his position visible in the slump of his shoulders. "But I hoped they'd play it differently. They're getting desperate, which makes them dangerous." Kendra sat straighter in her chair, her spine like steel. The question that had been burning inside her since finding Devon's file finally pushed its way out, demanding to be heard. "Why didn't you destroy Mercer when Devon died?" The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken accusations. The directness of her question seemed to catch him off guard. For a moment, the careful mask of the Supreme Court justice slipped, revealing raw pain underneath, a wound that had never properly healed. But he didn't dodge, giving her the respect of honesty. "I was told I had to choose," he said slowly, each word heavy with old regret, his fingers laced together so tightly his knuckles whitened. "The bench, or revenge." Understanding dawned on Kendra's face, her eyes widening slightly. "They threatened your nomination." "Not directly. They never do." His laugh was hollow, echoing with years of silent compromise. But the message was clear. I could pursue justice for Devon and lose any chance of effecting real change from the inside, or— He trailed off, unable to finish the thought that had haunted him for years. "Or you could play their game and rise to power," Kendra finished, her voice neither accusatory nor forgiving, simply stating the reality they both now faced. "I told myself I could do more good from the bench than from the streets." He looked directly into the camera, his gaze unflinching now. "Now I'm giving you the same choice, Kendra. You can pause the tribunal, let me handle this through proper political channels. Or you can continue and risk both our positions. The system doesn't forgive those who expose its flaws." Kendra didn't hesitate. Her voice was clear and steady when she responded, conviction ringing in every word. "You chose your path in silence," she said. "I'm choosing mine in public. Some things need to be said out loud." Something flickered across Justice Vale's face. Pride, mixed with fear for her safety, and perhaps a touch of envy for her courage. He nodded slowly, accepting her decision with the gravity it deserved. "Then you'll need to survive what comes next," he warned, his voice grave, the words hanging between them like a prayer and a prophecy. "And I can't shield you this time. They'll come at you from angles you haven't even considered." "I understand," Kendra replied, her calm belying the quickening of her pulse. The call ended with a soft electronic tone, leaving Kendra alone with her thoughts. The quiet of her room felt heavier now, charged with the weight of decisions made and battles chosen, the path ahead both terrifying and necessary. The sound of shattering glass shattered the silence, jagged and violent in the peaceful night. Kendra rushed from her room, heart pounding against her ribs. In the living room, she found Nia already there, staring at the broken front window, her mother's face a mask of protective fury. Cool night air rushed in through the jagged hole, carrying with it the scent of danger and the distant wail of a car speeding away. There, on the carpet among the glittering shards, lay a brick. A piece of paper was wrapped around it, secured with a rubber band, ominous in its deliberate placement. Kendra moved forward before her mother could stop her, drawn by an instinct that overrode caution. She picked up the brick, its rough surface cool against her palm, heavier than she expected. With steady fingers, she unwrapped the note. The message was typed, stark black letters against white paper, clinical in their threat. "Back off or bleed like your uncle's brother." Nia reached for the brick, maternal protection evident in every line of her body, but Kendra held it firmly. Her mother recognized the expression on her daughter's face, the same quiet determination she'd shown in Mercer's courtroom, the same unflinching resolve she'd displayed during the tribunal. It was the look of someone who had found their purpose. There were no tears in Kendra's eyes, no trembling in her hands, no fear in her voice when she spoke, only a calm certainty that seemed to fill the room. "Mom," she said calmly, still holding the brick like evidence in a case she was building, turning it over as if reading a message in the rough texture itself. "Call the media. I'm ready to speak. They need to see this." Nia looked at her daughter. Really looked at her. Gone was any trace of the little girl who used to hide behind law books. In her place stood a young woman who had chosen her battlefield and was prepared for war, shoulders squared against whatever might come. The brick in Kendra's hands wasn't just a threat. It was proof. Proof of desperation. Proof that the tribunal had struck a nerve. Proof that truth, when wielded precisely, could make even the most powerful men resort to schoolyard tactics. In its crude weight was confirmation that she was on the right path. The night air continued to pour through the broken window, but neither mother nor daughter moved to cover it. They stood together in the wreckage, two generations of women who had faced similar choices: silence or action, safety or truth, preservation or progress. In the glittering shards at their feet lay fragments of the old way, broken but still dangerous. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Little Shop of Stories, an independent bookstore in downtown Atlanta. The usual cheerful buzz of children browsing books was absent. The store had been closed for a private interview. Between the shelves of young adult fiction, Kendra Morgan sat across from Risa McLean, her posture straight but relaxed. A small camera crew worked quietly in the background, adjusting lighting and sound levels. Risa had chosen this location deliberately. Surrounded by stories of young people changing their worlds, it felt fitting for what they were about to discuss. "Are you ready?" Risa asked, adjusting her microphone. Her voice was gentle but professional. Kendra nodded. She wore a simple blue blazer over a white shirt, professional but age-appropriate. The mark on her cheek had faded but was still visible under the careful lighting. "Let's start with that day in the courtroom," Risa began. "Tell me about Judge Mercer." Kendra's voice was clear and steady as she spoke. "Judge Ronald Mercer struck me across the face in open court for citing legal precedent that contradicted his ruling. But this isn't about that single act of violence. It's about a pattern of abuse of power that spans decades." She described the events leading to her arrest, the denial of her rights, and the systematic intimidation she'd witnessed in juvenile detention. Her words were precise, each statement backed by specific cases and statistics she'd gathered. The Youth Constitutional Tribunal of Accountability isn't just about Judge Mercer, she explained. It's about bringing transparency to a system that thrives on silence. We've documented over 50 cases where Black and brown youth received dramatically harsher sentences than white defendants for identical offenses. Risa leaned forward. "Some people might say you're too young to understand the complexities of the legal system." A small smile crossed Kendra's face. The law doesn't have an age requirement for understanding it. It has standards, precedents, and constitutional foundations. When those in power violate these principles, age shouldn't determine who can point out those violations. She went on to outline the YCTA's methodology, their use of AI analysis, peer review, and professional legal consultation. "We invite the public to watch our final 2 sessions," she announced. "Every piece of evidence we present is verifiable and will be submitted to the proper oversight boards." The interview continued for nearly 2 hours. Kendra never raised her voice, never showed anger. She presented facts with the precision of a surgeon and the clarity of a teacher. When she described the brick thrown through their window, she did so without drama, simply another piece of evidence in the pattern she was exposing. "What do you say to those who might accuse you of having a personal vendetta against Judge Mercer?" Risa asked. "Truth isn't personal," Kendra replied. "Data isn't emotional. If presenting documented evidence of judicial misconduct is considered a vendetta, then perhaps we need to examine why we're more concerned about protecting judges than ensuring justice." As the interview wrapped up, social media was already buzzing. By 7 o'clock that evening, when the full interview aired, number Kendra Speaks and number YCTA Tribunal were trending nationwide. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Legal blogs began publishing detailed analyses of the tribunal's findings. Law professors shared clips of Kendra citing precedents, praising her accurate interpretation of constitutional law. Youth organizations across the country announced solidarity watch parties for the final tribunal sessions. At Kendra's high school, students organized viewing parties in classrooms and the cafeteria. Teachers who had remained silent before now spoke openly about witnessing similar injustices. The principal, who had removed Kendra from student council just days earlier, issued a public statement. "We regret our hasty action regarding Ms. Morgan's student council position. Her commitment to justice and civic engagement exemplifies the values we aim to instill in our students. She is hereby reinstated with our full support." After the cameras stopped rolling, Risa and Kendra remained in the bookstore. The journalist reached into her bag and pulled out a small flash drive. "An old friend of your uncle gave me this," she said quietly, pressing it into Kendra's hand. Kendra plugged the drive into her laptop. A folder opened, revealing dozens of emails from 2006. Her eyes widened as she read the sender names: Judge Mercer, D.A. Calden Briggs, and Judge Thomas Hartford, retired. The subject line of the main thread read, "Suppress the voice before it becomes law." As she scrolled through the emails, her hands remained steady, but her jaw tightened. The messages detailed explicit strategies for targeting and silencing youth activists through legal channels. They discussed using juvenile detention as a cooling mechanism for ambitious troublemakers. Each word was carefully chosen to appear professional, while masking the systematic suppression they were orchestrating. Kendra stared at the screen, her expression unchanged but her eyes intense. "This is the smoking gun," she said softly. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the bookstore windows, illuminating dust motes that danced around them like silent witnesses to history being unveiled. The weight of what she held, digital proof of a conspiracy spanning years, settled over the quiet space between the shelves of stories. The night before the final tribunal session settled over Atlanta like a heavy blanket. Streetlights cast long shadows through the newly repaired window of the Morgan home, their warm glow a stark contrast to the tension inside. The house was unnaturally quiet, save for the soft click of locks being tested and retested. In the living room, Malik had fallen asleep on the couch, his phone still clutched in his hand, open to social media feeds discussing tomorrow's tribunal. His chest rose and fell steadily, finally at peace after days of constant vigilance. Nia Morgan moved methodically through the house, her hands working with practiced precision as she checked each window and door. She'd installed 3 new deadbolts that afternoon, their brass fixtures gleaming in the dim light. The hardware store owner had given them to her at cost, refusing to charge full price after recognizing her from the news coverage. She tested each lock twice, then 3 times, her movements betraying the worry she tried so hard to hide from her children. Upstairs in her bedroom, Kendra sat cross-legged on her bed, a worn photo album open in her lap. The cover was faded blue fabric, its corners frayed from years of handling. Each plastic-covered page held memories frozen in time, telling the story of a girl who had always seemed older than her years. Her fingers traced the edge of a photograph showing her at age 5, standing on a milk crate at her kindergarten debate club, pointing emphatically at a hand-drawn chart about playground fairness. Even then, her expression had been serious, focused, determined to be heard. She turned the page. There she was at 8, receiving a certificate for winning her first mock trial competition. Her hair was in neat braids, and she wore a dress Nia had stayed up all night sewing. The judge that day had called her a force of nature in training. More pages turned. School debates, youth leadership conferences, academic awards. Each image showed her growing not just in height, but in presence. There was something in her eyes that seemed to deepen with each passing year, an understanding that went beyond her age. Then she reached the photos from her first visit to Washington, D.C. She'd been 12, touring the Supreme Court building with a school group. In one picture, she stood on the famous steps, looking up at the words "Equal Justice Under Law" carved in stone above her. She remembered thinking how beautiful those words were, how powerful their promise. Another photo showed her uncle from that same trip, though she hadn't known then that he was more than just a kind justice who'd taken special interest in their tour group. Justice Vale had spoken to their class about the importance of constitutional rights, and she'd peppered him with questions until her teachers had to pull her away. The quiet of her room was interrupted by the soft buzz of her phone. Her uncle's name appeared on the screen. Kendra answered, keeping her voice low. "Uncle Langston." This time his voice carried none of the careful warning from their previous calls. Instead, it held a warmth, a pride he no longer tried to hide. "I've been watching the tribunal recordings," he said. "Your presentation of evidence, your handling of counter-arguments, it's masterful, Kendra." She closed the photo album, setting it aside. "Thank you, but what if—" "Win or lose, Kendra, know this," he interrupted gently. "Devon would have followed you into fire." The mention of her uncle's lost brother made her throat tight. "What if it's not enough?" she whispered, voicing the fear she'd kept buried beneath layers of legal strategy and careful planning. "Then make it undeniable," he replied, his voice firm with conviction. "You've already done what many thought impossible. You've made them face their own actions in the light of day." Across town, in a private room at the exclusive Capital City Club, Judge Ronald Mercer sat at a mahogany table with D.A. Calden Briggs and 2 state senators. The room smelled of expensive cigars and desperate strategy. Crystal glasses of bourbon sat untouched before them as they reviewed their planned counterattack. "The motion is ready," Briggs said, sliding copies of a document across the table. "We'll announce it just before the final session begins. Due to concerns of juvenile manipulation and foreign interference, we move to dismiss all findings of this unauthorized tribunal." One of the senators, a man with silver hair and cold eyes, nodded approvingly. "The foreign angle is smart. Plant the seed of doubt about outside influence and people will question everything else." Mercer's fingers drummed against the polished wood. The girl has no reach beyond her little online circus. She can't fight state-level opposition. They continued plotting, their voices low and confident, certain their position and power would be enough to crush this final resistance. None of them noticed the cleaning staff member who lingered a moment too long near the door, phone hidden carefully in his apron pocket. Back in her room, Kendra opened her laptop one final time. The screen's blue light illuminated her face as she navigated to a secure server. With steady hands, she uploaded the complete email thread. Years of documented corruption and calculated oppression laid bare in the conspirators' own words. The upload completed with a soft chime. Next, she opened her presentation for tomorrow's final hearing, reviewing each slide one last time. Every piece of evidence was in place, every argument honed to razor sharpness. Reaching for a small pad of sticky notes, she wrote 5 words in her neat handwriting. "We finish this tomorrow." She pressed the note to her wall, right next to her constitutional law study guide. Finally, she closed the laptop. The room fell into darkness, broken only by the gentle glow of streetlights through her window. For the first time since this all began, she allowed herself to feel the weight of everything. The fear, the pressure, the magnitude of what she'd set in motion. A single tear rolled down her cheek. She let it fall, this one moment of vulnerability in the privacy of her room. Then she wiped it away, took a deep breath, and lay down to sleep. Morning sunlight streamed through Kendra's bedroom window, casting warm rays across her carefully chosen outfit. She stood before her mirror, adjusting the crisp black blazer and checking that every detail was perfect. The tribunal badge, a simple design featuring scales of justice, gleamed against her collar. Her hair was pulled back neatly, revealing a face that carried both youth and determination in equal measure. Nia appeared in the doorway, watching her daughter with a mixture of pride and concern etched across her features. She crossed the room quietly, her footsteps soft on the carpet, and placed a gentle hand on Kendra's shoulder. Their eyes met in the mirror's reflection. "Whatever happens," Nia said softly, giving her daughter's shoulder a squeeze, "you've already changed everything." Kendra's reflection stared back, unwavering. "Not enough yet," she replied, her voice steady and clear. She reached up and covered her mother's hand with her own, drawing strength from the connection. The house was unusually still that morning. Even Malik, typically full of restless energy, moved with careful purpose as he helped set up Kendra's technical equipment. 3 laptops were arranged on her desk, each serving a different function for the tribunal stream. Backup power supplies hummed quietly, ensuring nothing could interrupt the transmission. As the clock approached 10 a.m., Kendra settled into her chair, adjusting her microphone and checking the camera angle one final time. The tribunal platform's interface glowed before her, showing all 12 youth jurors logging in from their respective locations across the country. Their faces appeared one by one in neat squares across her screen, each wearing formal attire and expressions of solemn responsibility. The viewer count began climbing immediately as the stream went live. Numbers ticked up rapidly: 100,000, 500,000, 800,000. Within 20 minutes, the counter showed 1.2 million viewers watching in real time. Messages of support flooded the moderated chat channels faster than the volunteer moderators could process them. Kendra took a deep breath and began her opening statement. Her voice carried the weight of months of preparation, yet maintained its characteristic clarity and control. "Today we conclude our examination of systemic judicial misconduct," she began, her words measured and precise. "But first, new evidence has come to light that transforms our understanding of this case from individual incidents to orchestrated suppression." With deliberate movements, she shared her screen, displaying the 2006 email chain. The documents appeared in crisp detail, each damning word clearly visible to the millions watching. These communications reveal a coordinated effort between Judge Ronald Mercer, District Attorney Calden Briggs, and other officials to systematically suppress legal agency in Black youth, she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "They didn't just target children, they architected silence." The chat channels exploded with reaction as viewers processed the evidence. Legal commentators watching the stream began posting real-time analyses, their shock evident in their hurried responses. Kendra navigated through the evidence methodically, highlighting key phrases and patterns. Then she paused, her finger hovering over the final piece of evidence. "What you're about to hear was recorded during a sealed case deliberation," she announced. "It demonstrates the underlying prejudice that has infected our judicial system." She pressed play. Mercer's voice filled the stream, his words carrying a casual cruelty as he made a racist joke about a young defendant. The audio was crystal clear, leaving no room for misinterpretation or denial. The youth jurors' faces showed varying degrees of shock and disgust as they listened. When the recording ended, one of the jurors, a white teenager from Vermont named Sarah Collins, requested to speak. Her face filled the main screen as she delivered a carefully prepared statement. "Throughout these proceedings, we've examined hundreds of cases, thousands of documents, and countless hours of testimony," Sarah began, her voice slightly trembling but determined. "The pattern is undeniable. Judge Mercer has used the law not as a shield, but a sword against the vulnerable. He has betrayed the fundamental principles of justice he swore to uphold." The tribunal moved into deliberation, conducting their discussion live before the watching world. Each juror presented their analysis, citing specific cases and patterns they'd been assigned to investigate. Their young voices carried the weight of thorough research and moral clarity. When the time came to vote, there was little hesitation. The decision was announced, 11-0, with one abstention. The formal declaration appeared on screen. "Judge Ronald Mercer is hereby found guilty of systemic bias, professional misconduct, and ethical corruption." Kendra faced the camera one final time, her composure unwavering despite the historic moment. "This judgment may not carry legal weight," she stated clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the digital courtroom. "But it carries truth, and truth demands to be followed." She stood up from her desk, the camera still running. As she stepped away, her burner phone lit up on the desk beside her. A new message appeared from an unknown number. "You have our attention. Let's talk. GA Judicial Review Board." A quiet smile crossed Kendra's face as she read the message, the morning light still streaming through her window, illuminating her face in its warm glow. The morning headlines blazed across every major news outlet, their bold text declaring victory in ways Kendra never imagined. "Mercer disbarred amid judicial probe" dominated the front pages, accompanied by photos of the disgraced judge leaving the courthouse with his head bowed, shoulders slumped in defeat. "Georgia adopts pilot youth tribunal review model," followed close behind, along with "Supreme Justice Vail cleared of ethics complaints." The words seemed almost surreal, like someone else's story rather than her own. Kendra sat quietly on a wooden bench outside her high school, watching the steady stream of students filing through the main entrance. The crisp autumn air carried whispers and glances in her direction, but they felt different now, respectful, inspired. Many students wore small silver pins that proclaimed, "I believe Kendra," in bold black letters. She noticed how some of her teachers, passing by on their way to morning duties, gave her subtle nods of acknowledgement and support. A few even smiled, something that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. The weight of the past week settled around her like a familiar blanket, not heavy anymore, just present. A reminder of what speaking up could accomplish. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through the dozens of unread emails that had flooded her inbox since the tribunal's conclusion. The notifications kept coming, a constant digital reminder of how far her voice had carried. 3 prestigious universities had offered full scholarships, their letters filled with praise for her extraordinary commitment to justice and unprecedented leadership. 2 major publishing houses had sent detailed proposals for book deals, promising to tell her story in her own words. The American Bar Association's Youth Council extended an invitation for her to be their keynote speaker at their annual convention. Each message carried opportunity, acclaim, recognition, everything society told her she should want. Kendra closed each email with a polite but firm decline. These weren't the changes she was fighting for. Personal fame had never been the goal. Instead, she gathered her materials and headed to the administrative offices, where she had scheduled a meeting with Principal Davidson and District Superintendent Wells. The conference room felt too large for just 3 people, but Kendra filled it with her presence as she laid out her carefully prepared proposal, each document placed with precision on the polished table. "Our current curriculum fails to prepare students for real-world interactions with the legal system," she began, spreading out her research across the table. "We need comprehensive Know Your Rights education starting in 6th grade, and a reformed juvenile law curriculum that addresses actual challenges our students face. The gap between what we teach and what our students need to know is putting lives at risk." Principal Davidson shifted uncomfortably in his chair, tugging at his tie. "Miss Morgan, while we appreciate your recent experiences, changing established curriculum requires extensive review and approval processes. There are channels for this sort of thing." Superintendent Wells nodded in agreement, his expression carefully neutral. "There are budgetary considerations, state standards to maintain. The board would need to vote. It could take months, even years." Kendra met their resistance with calm determination. "You teach history," she stated, her voice carrying the same quiet authority that had faced down Judge Mercer. "I just made it." She opened her laptop, displaying statistics about youth legal literacy and its impact on community outcomes. "This isn't about my experience anymore. It's about preventing the next student from needing to fight this hard. It's about saving lives." The men exchanged glances, their objections wavering in the face of her meticulous preparation and undeniable track record. The air in the room seemed to shift as they began to realize this wasn't a student with a passing cause. This was Kendra Morgan. That evening, as Kendra worked on refining her curriculum proposal, Justice Vale's retirement speech played on the family television. She paused her typing to watch her uncle address the nation one final time. His distinguished figure stood at the podium, his voice carrying decades of judicial experience and newfound wisdom, his silver hair catching the light. "I once thought silence protected the law," he said, his words measured and profound. "My niece taught me truth protects it better." He didn't look at the camera when he said it, but Kendra felt the weight of his words settle across the country. A small private acknowledgement in a very public forum. Later that night, in the quiet of her room, Kendra pulled out her journal, the same one that had documented every step of her journey from that first night of the arrest to the tribunal's conclusion. The pages bore witness to her tears, her fears, her determination. She opened to a fresh page and wrote with deliberate strokes, "Revenge ends something. Replacement begins something." The words felt right. Final. She closed the journal and reached for the flyer she'd designed earlier that day. The clean, professional layout announced, Founding Meeting, Youth Legal Academy, Atlanta Chapter, led by Kendra Morgan. She carefully taped it to her wall, right next to her tribunal badge. This was just the beginning. Gathering her jacket, Kendra took one last look at her room, at the space where she'd planned a revolution in legal accountability. The morning sun was bright and promising as she stepped outside, where Malik and Nia waited by the car. No reporters crowded their lawn anymore. No cameras flashed. No headlines screamed for attention. Just a family, standing together in the warm Georgia sunlight. Just a girl who had refused to stay quiet, ready to take the next step in her journey. Not with grand gestures or national attention, but with the steady, determined work of creating lasting change. One student, one classroom, one community at a time. If you enjoyed the story of Kendra, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. If you enjoyed the story of Kendra, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.